Hi, I'm Margaret Stoll, YALLWEST co-founder.
And I'm Melissa Dela Cruz, YALLWEST co-founder.
I'm Raphael Simon, middle grade maestro of YALLWEST.
I'm Shane Pangburn, YALLWEST producer.
Welcome to our 7th annual and 279,000th, or that's how it feels, virtual YALLWEST.
Actually, we had our first and so far only virtual YALLWEST a year ago at what we thought was the beginning of a very short pandemic, but it turned out to be a very long, tough year. But we are so glad to be here with you today to celebrate books and young voices and everything that's going to be great coming up in the world. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here virtually. We can't wait to see you all in person. We plan for YALLWEST 2022 at Santa Monica High School, out in the sun by the beach with authors and readers and everyone together. And we can't wait for that. But we also can't wait for the events today. And I'm excited to see it.
And we are so grateful for the passion and enthusiasm of all our teen readers as they continue to change the world and we follow in their lead. And we are also so thankful to all our sponsors and all the money that they gave us so we can have this festival. Thank you to HarperCollins, who gave us a huge donation. We have Fierce Reads, Penguin Teen, Epic Reads, Underline, Disney, Riveted, Peak, Novel, HMH Teen, Wednesday Books, I Read YA, Tor Teen, Flatiron, Bookish, Wattpad, and Penguin Audio. Thank you so, so much. We would not be here without you.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Let the festival begin.
Yay!
Hi, everyone. So excited to be the first panel of the day. Good morning to California, because it's very early, which makes it a great topic for us to talk about Stranger Than Fiction, because I always find the morning time to be super strange. But first, let me introduce myself, and then everyone else is going to introduce themselves. My name is Dhonielle Clayton, and I am the author of the Bells series, the Tiny Pretty Things series, and the forthcoming co-author of Blackout. And my pronouns are she and her. Bethany, will you go next?
Hello, I am Bethany C Morrow. I'm the author of A Song Below Water and coming soon, A Chorus Rises, which is a follow-up to that, as well as So Many Beginnings, which is a Little Women remix coming later this year. And my pronouns are she and her.
Diana?
Hi, my name is Diana Ma, and I am the author of Eris Apparently, which is my debut novel. And it is the first in the series of the Daughters of the Dynasty series. And my pronouns are she and her.
Great. Gretchen?
Good morning from the West Coast. My name is Gretchen McNeil, and I am the author of 10 young adult novels. The most recent series is the #Murder Trending series, and the third and final book in that series, #No Escape, came out last year, which is about a sort of non-post-apocalyptic world where your deaths are streamed live and horrible, horrible things happen. And she, her for me.
Totally on brand for Gretchen McNeil. I love you. Natalie?
Hi, everyone. I'm the author of Revenge of the Smiths, which is my debut novel. Is it echoing? Is that... let me see if I can fix it. And I'm really excited to be here. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Great. I'm so excited for us to jump in. First of all, I felt like this entire year was stranger than fiction, stranger than I could have ever imagined. All of 2020. And so books were a refuge for me, and writing was both difficult and also where I was able to get a lot of things out. And I wonder, as you were trying to work and write and live and balance everything during the pandemic, what was strange for you? How did your writing change? How did your relationship to story change? Your relationship to the industry, to books? all of it?
Yeah, I mean, because I've been doing this now for longer than I'd care to admit, I think it was a huge shift in the amount of time, mental time, that I got to spend by myself. Because suddenly, and I don't know how many of you have other people in the house, but suddenly there were people in my house all the time. Little tiny people, giant human men people, and who demanded things like food and space to work and entertainment. And so the mental space where I would think about story and think about character and think about the problems that had come up in whatever manuscript I was working on was gone. And finding that space was a challenge. And I mean, when I say finding the space, I mean like taking a shower sometimes was the quiet moment in my day. And so I'd sit there like shampooing my hair, thinking about, what I needed to do in the 30 minutes of nap time with the small children that I would get to write. And so that shift, sort of the unburdening of my selfish time hoarding was the hugest one for me, and one that I'm still grappling with for sure.
I feel like I didn't have that kind of shift. I have a 16-year-old, and we have a very, very, Dhonielle knows this, we're just like constantly together, and it's been that way since he was born. It doesn't impact I remember he was a newborn and he'd just be laying there staring at me because he was an alien baby, and I would be able to write all day with him sitting there. So it was strange that the big things that a lot of people talked about didn't change, and yet everything still changed. And it was still, what I found is like this industry, particularly when you're writing YA, will tell you the protagonist must be active. The protagonist can't just have life happen to her. Yes. How does your protagonist, and I remember because I tweeted about it, I was like, so publishing, has it occurred to you that none of us would be able to be protagonists of our stories right now? Like, did it ever occur to you that assuming this autonomy and this this ability to control and push the plot forward yourself is not realistic? It is not always, and I've always pushed back against that because I hate traditional storytelling in the first place. But this year was definitely I really hope some people are taking notes about this, because maybe it's time for a couple of books where stuff is happening to teenagers, stuff is happening to kids that they do not actually have any control over, because that's what we're all living right now. It's a valid story. It's a valid protagonist. Sometimes things are happening to you.
Yes.
And you would think that, it doesn't fit the rules of fiction. And you're like, everything's stranger than fiction now. So all the rules are out of there. Should be, yeah. Natalie, Diana, any thoughts?
My whole pandemic experience has been super weird because I graduated from college in the middle of all of this. So I'm trying to figure out how to even be an adult while I'm I don't know. I'm just I don't know what I'm doing at any given moment. So it's just been really it's been a really interesting kind of experience, I think. And I, for the first time, actually had time to write without having classes or anything. It was this weird kind of in-between period of I can write. And I felt like there was immense pressure to write just because I had the time to do it. So I think that
welcome to that rodeo where you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be writing and I'm watching Netflix and eating ice cream.
What are you talking about, Dhonielle? No one does that.
It's I have all this time to write, all this time to do my work.
Because that's all it takes. Anything. All writing requires is time. That's it.
Just typing.
Just type.
I mean, that was the meme going around, right? At the beginning of the pandemic. It's now's the time to write your novel. And I just sit in the background grinding my teeth.
Right, don't you guys know how hard it is? Don't you know?
Right. In the best times. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Only celebrities who've never written a novel.
Exactly, could do it. Diana, what about you?
Oh, I was reading all those memes thinking, who are these people and what are their lives like? I was going to say everything changed for me, but at the same time, this was the first novel I had written on a deadline, so I had no other experience. And then so suddenly I was writing my first novel. I was teaching my classes remotely, and my 2 grade school kids were home. And it was just, and I thought, oh, I don't know how this is going to happen. And at the same time, I was writing a novel that was supposed to be kind of this like modern royalty novel, and there was all this luxury stuff I was researching, and this world of nightclubs and fashion, and I was thinking, this is so far removed from my world now of pajamas and fighting, Gretchen, as you were saying, fighting for space in the shower. And it was like, and I'm writing about big spa tubs and hotels with rose-strewn petals, and thinking, wow, I did not realize I was writing fantasy, but that is what I am writing right now. So, yes, and I had no space to write. For some reason, I ended up being the only person without a door to close. So,
yes,
yeah, because your kids have their bedrooms, so they were doing homeschool from their remote Zooming into classes, or running away from Zoom school, and then my husband got he's in the garage space, which is where I am now, which is why there's a divider here, and he had a door put in so he could close the door, and he said, well, when you're doing your panels, you could be in this garage space and we'll have a door. And it's actually a good thing, but this is where he works, and I work in a little tiny space between my kids' rooms. So, yeah.
It's so fascinating what has happened during this pandemic and during this time, but I feel like we're going to make it. We are making it through as best we can. We have no choice. And what
it gets easier. I swear it gets easier. Like, that's the worst experience possible.
And like we faced it. And now I'm curious about we're thinking about our fiction and we're thinking about our writing. And I want to know, what do you think? We're thinking about what's stranger than fiction and the things that are in our novels. And I want to know, for the novels that you have coming out or the ones you have right now, what are the strangest elements? Gretchen, I already know this is going to be the perfect question for you, but like the strangest things that you've put in your novel and sort of how things come together, because you never know when you're researching or when you have that idea how it's going to go into your book. And you're like, that's not going to work. Like, that's too strange, or that's too bizarre. But I want to hear from each one of you sort of how you stumbled into your books. What is the strangest element, would you say, that works?
I have to go first here, because I don't think mine is going to be as fun-loving as everyone else's. Because when I saw the title of this, first of all, of this panel, I was like, well, I'm a Black American woman writing about Black American girls, so everything that I know to be true is stranger than fiction because it's not acknowledged. And every time it happens, people act like it's a new horror story. So when I was writing So Many Beginnings, which is my Little Women remix, the strangest thing I put in it was the truth, because historical fiction is actually usually fantastical. So to tell the truth about 1863 in a way that's not taught, that's, has to be excavated to even put it in correctly, it means that everything about the way that living in the shadow of the Union was actually a nightmare, and being emancipated also meant that you had to stay close to this group who would terrorize you, but also if you got too far, you'd be terrorized. You also couldn't move around the country, and it looked very different than this one sentence idea that we put into children's history books. So putting the truth in that book made it feel like it's actually historical fantasy, because we're so unaccustomed to historicity. And then the strangest thing about writing that book in this time period was having to constantly remind myself, this book is set in 1863. This is not present day. This is not supposed to be present day. And relating far more to that book as I was writing it than my contemporary fantasy set in today in a part of the country I actually am from and have spent a lot of time in. It was really difficult, and I won't even say disheartening because it was so strange that I didn't really know how I felt. I just felt strange while I was writing it.
It's fascinating how we stumble upon and we learn the real thing, the real story, while we're trying to make up a story. Yeah. And that always feels like, wait, am I in the Twilight Zone? No, this is something that I was never told. This is something that has been hidden and we've been lied to. And now I have found the truth and putting it in fiction. And people are going to write reviews. We're going to be talking about them, Bethany. Where it's like, 100%. This wasn't real. This didn't happen.
This feels like too much. This really, yes, babe, I have a bibliography.
Right, and then those primary sources are going to come on the timeline, knowing Bethany C Morrow, and then it's going to be over. Yep. Yep.
Bethany, it's fascinating you mentioned that. I don't know if you've seen, there's a documentary called Black Noir, and it's about horror films about and starring, Black people. And they start it by saying the original horror movie for Black America is Birth of a Nation.
Yes.
Which, had never occurred to me. And then as they're talking about it, it was like this sick churning in your stomach. It's the only movie they talk about in the whole documentary that is 100% factually based. Everything else is fantastical horror. Right. And it was churning. It was a churning experience to think about that. And so, yeah. I write horrible things, and I had an experience writing Murder Trending back in 2016, where I had sold this book about a world where a reality TV star gets elected president and then sells the criminal justice system to a reality television producer, and they open this island in San Francisco where they send criminals who are on camera all the time, and then they get hunted down by thematic serial killers. And then 7 days after I sold the book, Trump got elected president. And so suddenly I feel like I've spent years sort of writing this series, just ahead of what was happening. And it seemed so silly when I wrote it in 2016 that would never happen. Yeah, and again, white woman privilege, to be like, oh, no one will elect this lunatic, and then we lived a nightmare. So I feel like that whole series was just one book after another of okay, what crazy murder scenario can I put in the book that would never happen? And then thinking oh, please don't happen, please don't be a thing that actually happens. In writing my next book that comes out in 2022, it's called Dig Two Graves, and it's a YA Strangers on a Train, for those of you that have read the Hinsmith book or seen the Hitchcock film. And I struggled with, because it's a contemporary, horror, and I struggled with mentioning the pandemic. And I had this one experience where the character says oh, it was worse than being in quarantine. And my copy editor said, because she was a social pariah, so she was sort of out of school for a while, and she's like, well, would she still be thinking about her time, her social ostracization? And I was like, no, I mean the actual quarantine where we were all in lockdown. Do you remember that? Where are you? And it was such a weird dissonance. I just assume when you drop a word like quarantine into a book right now that everybody knows what you're talking about. And my copy editor just had some sort of disconnect from the real world to this book of fiction she was reading.
It's so interesting, all of those parallels too, and the things that we're going to think are strange that are going to haunt us for a long time and influence our fiction, for sure. Natalie or Diana? Otherwise, we can jump into another question.
I was thinking about this because just so many things to say, but Gretchen, hearing about your novel, about how you wrote this thing that you thought was going to be so out there, and then Trump got elected. And Bethany, I cannot wait to read that novel, that Little Women rewrite.
Oh, it's so good.
I'm so excited about this. Anyway, so I started writing again. I took a long break from writing. I had a full-time career, I had kids, and I never thought I would get back to it. And then Trump got elected, and I was like, okay, it is time to write again. I am writing YA, I'm writing speculative, I'm writing dystopian, and this is where my head is. So the novel that I submitted and that I got my agent for is a near dystopian novel about kind of what happens when all these extremes, Muslim registry, all these things that have been threatening us actually happen. And so when my wonderful agent sent it out, it was pretty much right at pandemic time, and people were saying things like, this is great, but it's too real. I would really love something really fluffy now. So Eris apparently is a fluffy YA rom-com, and that is the one that took off. So I've been thinking a lot about the kinds of, and I find myself also drawn to really light, fluffy escapism right now. But then I think it's just as necessary to have the hard stuff, and to see people actually overcome that hard stuff. So I still have hope for my near dystopian, near future novel someday.
We definitely need both. Teens need both. They need to be able to have a balance. I always feel like I'm always saying that. Balance, 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 please. So they know they can fall in love, but they also know that they can defeat a dragon. All the different kinds. The pandemic, the Trump dragon, all of them. They need to know. Natalie?
Yeah, I've been thinking really hard about this question because I feel like the whole point of my book was to be like as like close to the truth as possible. So I feel like I avoided anything that could potentially be strange. So this question has been really interesting for me, kind of reflecting on it and kind of what my writing process was like in terms of what I wanted to like communicate in my book and what I wanted to actually say. I feel like it's almost like I don't know. I don't know if there was anything really strange that came out of it. I think it was very much influenced by kind of like real life and sociology at the time I was writing it. Like the Kavanaugh hearings were going on. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that was happening in real life. And it was just like kind of overlapping with the book, I feel like, in a lot of interesting ways. So I feel like it was it's grounded in a lot of truth.
And it's so interesting you bring that up because I would love for us to talk about it's when we see how people react to our work and they're like, that could never be true, right? It's like they pluck out the things that are true, that the seeds that we've rooted things in, and rail against them. And it makes me think when I'm writing a book, I'm like, okay, so let me write down what's true so I can prepare myself for these types of conversations, even when people are like, that can't be true. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, I just get so upset. And I keep thinking about everyone's books and sort of where you start. So when you sit down to start working on your book and working on your novel, what kinds of truths do you start with? Of course, we start with the truth. I start with the truth and then I make it very strange, right? So then I start the process of the cooking of the idea. And I'm curious for all of you, where does it start with you? Does it start with the truth or does it start with the strange that leads you back to a true question or a true consideration that you're thinking about or theme?
It depends for me because everything doesn't happen differently. The undercurrent is always different. I tend to start with concept and character and concept are very, very closely connected for me. But let's say for A Chorus Rises, I will say that this is almost, in terms of like the conception, this is a spite book because I started to get the original, because I had a 2-book thing with Tor, and I was like, just so you guys know, I don't write the same thing twice, so the second book is not going to be related whatsoever. Sorry, not sorry. And then A Song Below Water starts going out, and I start getting, readers' responses and stuff. And it's like, oh my gosh, I love Tavia and Effie, which are the two main Black girls. And then suddenly all of these, like, I hate Naima. Oh my gosh, the villain Naima is so awful. And I was like, the villain in a story about a white supremacist society you think is a 16-year-old Black girl? We're gonna learn today. So I was like, no, ma'am, no, I did not offer up a sacrificial Black girl for you to hate, and you feel like it's okay because you liked these two other characters. Like, that's what we're not gonna do. So I was like, JK Tor, we're doing a Naima story. So, and then of course from there, just thinking about how to show, because she's a loco, which of course is a very different kind of mythos in my books than the original folklore, and just thinking about how that identity could get really knocked off course, and why, and what that would look like, and how to make that fantastical. But as usual, it has to do with all of my work, no matter how speculative, has to do with the real world. It's a grand tradition for Black American authors to use it as like a magnifying glass for what's real. So it's always starting with the truth, even when it's starting with the speculative.
I love it.
I start with a murder.
Always. I knew you were going to say that. Because Gretchen McNeil is one of my oldest, dearest friends. I knew she was going to say that.
Well, and that, it's a laugh line, right? But it's true in that, like Bethany, I write a lot of books that are not connected. I know Murder Trending is sort of it's a 2-book series, and then the third book is like a prequel sort of companion novel. But I don't write series. I write a lot of standalone books. And when you're writing a lot of standalone murder mysteries, one lesson I learned from Agatha Christie is, you can't do the same trick again, right? You can't go to the well on the same type of crime, the same type of killer. And so after I've done a few of these, I have to start thinking like, okay, so if it's going to be this type of murder, then who is the killer? And if this is the killer, then who is the victim? And if that is the case, then who is the cast that needs to be around that? And so I kind of reverse engineer a book from there. Most of my books are also not speculative or paranormal in any way. It's, rooted in the horror that men and women do to each other, which is much scarier than what demons can do to us, because that's speculative. And it's definitely a crafted, targeted type of plotting where I want to evoke a certain feeling when the killer is revealed, and then I just work backward from there. So I think murder in and of itself is not fantastical, but it's in the way that you present it to teens, it is fantastical, because they want to live this experience of fear without actually having to live the experience of fear. Like, you want to have that panic of like being trapped in a house with a serial killer without ever actually having to be trapped in a house with a serial killer. Like, that's the magic of horror. And so it sort of is both in a way. It's speculative, but it's real world speculative, which I think makes no sense. So I'm just going to pass the baton.
I start with murder. Nothing strange, just murder. The Gretchen McNeil story.
I'm going to get that on a shirt.
I know.
Start with murder.
Yeah, let me get you a mug so you can hold it up.
I'm going to hold you to that.
I will. Diana?
Yeah, so I was just going to say that the Daughters of the Dynasty series is a concept that it's a fantastic concept that my publishers came up with. So I started with asking my publishers, what do you want? And the second book, which I'm working on now in these very difficult times, is set in, it's my first historical novel. I've never written a historical novel before. And it's set in 1989, and it's set in China. So it was the time of the Tiananmen Square protests. And I have been I remember those protests. I was here in the US, but I remember watching it on TV and how horrifying it was. And so, and then right now, with protests going in Hong Kong, protests here in the US, and then the distinguishing between, because what gets very confused about that time period is distinguishing between protest and riots and insurrection. And what happened at the Capitol is what the government in China was worried about, but what was really happening was a very different thing. So doing all that research into and getting into an activist mindset while writing still a YA rom-com was very difficult. And then I started getting into it, and I threw in, there's a Tang Dynasty mystery now that involves art, and so there's an art mystery, and it's getting really, really, really very, well, definitely very strange. So I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I hope it comes together.
It will. Follow those strange rabbits.
Yeah, I usually end up starting with kind of like, I mean, it's hard to talk from experience. I feel like I just started. Like, I feel like this is like a whole thing that I'm going to have to go through, is like figuring out what exactly I want to write and who I want to be as an author, and kind of what this is actually what I want to say, I guess, with my writing. But I tend to, I think, find a lot of inspiration in ripped from the headlines. I'm a sociology student, so for me it feels very natural to kind of like fall back on what I'm reading, like real life, and kind of what's being presented to me, and what I can do with that, and kind of turning these like statistics and kind of the like, I don't want to call them boring because I find them really exciting, but like most people don't find research papers super exciting. So being able to turn the stuff that I'm reading in class into like real things that people can discuss and approach without having to take like a sociology class to understand, and that kind of idea. So it's definitely very like grounded, very like, I do not consider myself someone who's like extremely creative in that front yet, and I'm hoping to work on it, but that's kind of where I come from.
But that's also beautiful too, because we have to bring the real into an accessible place too, so that we can really dive into issues. People think it's so strange that these things have happened and are happening. It's like, no, let me present this to you so that you can understand it, so we can talk about what's really happening. And there's nothing about it that's fiction, right? You know, you're presenting these real life things. We have a lot of questions from the audience, so I'm going to read some of those, since there are just so many of them. I figured we would dive in. Okay. What is something that has happened in our real lives that has served as inspiration or jumping off point for a moment or a character in your stories? Does anyone have a good story around like a personal connection?
Well, with A Song Below Water, and I know I've said this so many times over the last year, A Song Below Water happened because I was on Twitter and a Black woman was being dogpiled and publicly abused, and would later be doxxed. And I said to my sister in DM, because I'm always on DM with my sister, I said my voice is power, because they were simultaneously trying to tear her down and also say nobody cares what you think. But it's like, but you're here, so how true can that be? That was absolutely a real world thing. There's a short story in an anthology that I did called Take the Mic. I was the editor and I contributed a story, and the basis of the story is about really harmful promposals. I won't give everything away, but that was literally based on seeing a picture from a promposal, and the Black girl was smiling, but the sign that they were holding was so offensive, and she was smiling, and a lot of people responded poorly to her, which was, you know, just a microcosm of our society of judging the victim. And, well, why didn't she say something? And it's like, you don't know what 1,000 cuts are like. You don't know what it's like to have to judge in the moment. Is this the moment that I can actually safely say something? Do I lose all the people that I loved? Have I just realized somebody I thought was my friend is actually really awful racist? Who, like, nobody thought about what she was going through. They just were criticizing the fact that she was smiling, even though the two people who wrote the sign were also in the picture and smiling. So there have actually been several times in my YA specifically that I will see something, and even if people are talking about it, again, as a student of sociology as well, and looking at all of the tacit messaging that goes into it and frames it, and the so-called liberal media, but the way that they repeat and continuously frame things in a way that's extremely useful to a white supremacist foundation. Having to say, you're not saying to other marginalized kids, you're not seeing things.
Yeah.
You are being gaslit. You are not seeing things. This is really what happened. This is really how it went down. And it is wrong. And I know that it's wrong. And I'm going to say it in a way to hopefully give language. That's a lot of what I'm trying to do in YA. It's why the real world impacts so much what I write, because a lot of times it is edifying. It is to show them that they're real, but it's also to give them language in those moments, in times when I remember even me not knowing. I knew something was wrong. I knew something wasn't okay, but I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know how to say what it was. And you have this fake little civil discourse, which kind of means if you can't tell me what I did wrong, then I didn't really do anything wrong, which is super unfair and ridiculous and created by the oppressor, but it still happens. So trying to give them language for the things that I'm seeing are still happening. I'm seeing they're still going through.
I love that. And I feel like fiction, and when we root our fiction in real places, we have real impact of giving that language. Gretchen, did you see a murder? And that's where you start.
My first published book is called Possessed, and it's about a teen exorcist. And I cannot tell you how many emails I got from people being like, have you been to an exorcism? And I think, hell no, I haven't been to an exorcism. Like, what world are you in? No, and you know what? I used to joke, like, I killed off a lot of ex-boyfriends in my books, but no, it's sort of a glib response. I come from a place where I'm lucky enough that I haven't seen a murder up close and personal. And so it probably isn't so great to be so glib about stuff like that. And, I'm definitely trying to sort of shift that. My go-to is always to make a joke about things, and sometimes it's not always appropriate. But no, I think my real world experience is sort of the darkness that lies in the human mind, and we all live that every day in this country, so we all know what that is.
Absolutely.
I was thinking one of the strangest things about being an author now is the Goodreads reviews. And one of the things...
Don't do it. Don't do it.
When I
don't
say
do it.
I can't help it. I'm drawn in. I need to stop. It's horrible.
Block the site. Block it.
But one thing I read, which I thought was so interesting, and it was a pattern, is people saying, well, this was not what I expected. And they had gone in expecting, and I can understand given the framing, and it is in many ways, it's a modern royal story. It's a rom-com. It's supposed to be fun and light and fluffy, and I feel like it is in many ways, but it's also about a Chinese American teen who is going into Hollywood and coming up against these horrible caricatures of roles she's expected to play. And so I've just been fascinated by real world accounts of actors and directors and screenwriters who have to contend with this. And so that's a large part of my book. And there are definitely people who are not happy about that. And there was one review, and I will stop one day. But there was one
Bethany,
review
that's exactly it. Yeah.
that was talking about my novel as filled with hate speech because of how I had characterized the white director, I think. And I was like, wait, my novel? My novel?
That person has spent no time in Hollywood,
Really?
let me tell you.
Really? So anyway.
I love it. I love that. It's hilarious to think about. First of all, Goodreads for us, it's just like, it's really hard to wean off. And it feels stranger than fiction to go on to Goodreads and to see your book and see yourself reviewed. That's also a out of body experience that I have. I'm going to ask one last question that'll be rapid fire, and then our panel is wrapping up. So I need to know if everyone is a plotter or a pantser. That's a big question that keeps popping up. So I need to know, especially if it's changed during quarantine, what you do now versus what you are.
I'm gonna say planter, and I'm not gonna define it. I'm a planter.
Definitely a plotter. I think with a murder mystery, it will do you a lot of good if you at least know who the killer is before you start writing the book. It's going to make your life harder if you don't.
I'm a pantser, which would really shock my students, but I've turned into a plotter.
Okay.
Yeah, plotter with some pantser tendencies.
And I guess I'm with Bethany. I think I'm with you. I'm a plantser. I was dragged into plotting, and now I kind of like it. I don't know. I'm on the fence. I am on the fence. I am stuck. All of this, I think about what we all do every day to create books. How we do this feels strange and weird and like a very different experience. I don't know about all of you, but as a kid, I never thought that I would be doing this for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like, I never thought, I was like, what? I get to make up things and people read them. And
I have a music degree from college. And I end up here, you know.
I was doing this when I was a kid, and the way that I wrote was I would write and then I would take it to my sisters, and then they would read it out loud with us together, and then I would go write the next thing. So the surprise to me was, wait, I have to get somebody's permission to do this? What are you talking about? I've been doing this the whole time. Why do I need
Bethany,
somebody to tell me?
You are Joe from Little Women.
I am, no, for real. Of course. Why else would I be interested in writing Little Women?
Amazing.
It's so perfect. It is it's interesting to think back on who we thought we would be and who we are now and how we are here. It does sometimes feel a little stranger. And what? My little self, little girl me would have been like, that's what you're doing? So it feels stranger than fiction. It feels like it's not real. And I just wanted to thank you all for coming on this panel today, this morning.
Thank you.
Wonderful moderator.
It's very early for some of us, and even still for even me on the East Coast. I'm like, ooh, this is rough. And I'm just so excited. This is one of my favorite festivals. Thank you to the YALLWEST crew. I love it so much. And I just enjoy having a morning. I feel like we've had morning tea. This tea and talk time, talking about stranger than fiction. Exactly. So everyone have a fabulous day. I can't wait to jump into the other panels. And happy writing.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.